Well, one thing I can say, I'm not an expert on really anything on cattle, on restoration, but what I've done is just through a lot of observation and with a lot of help from other agencies and mentors, has kind of gotten me where I am today.
I
Because
think
every
that's
piece of
awesome.
property, of course, is different.
Well, I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Tara Morris from Louisiana Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative. We're here today with Julie Mattox and also a guest facilitator, Brian Early from Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. We're going to be having some discussions today about prairie grazing and native grazing. To give you a little background on Julie, Julie Mattox is a retired surveyor with 35 years of experience in the energy industry, where she worked extensively across the United States and Canada. While operating her own consulting firm, she explored diverse ecosystems, and in her short time in the short and mixed grass prairies of the West, she sparked a deep interest in the prairie ecology and diversity. Following her career, she shifted her focus to restoring tallgrass prairie on a former dairy farm in Northeast Texas. Her restoration efforts combine soil health management, adaptive multi-species grazing, and native plant reintroduction to rebuild biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Julie partnered with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to implement the Pastures for Upland Birds program, and she collaborates closely with Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, to provide science-based management practices, to apply science-based management practices. She has conducted, this is the meat of where we're going to be talking about today. She has conducted forage testing on more than 50 native and non-native plant species consumed by her livestock, measuring the protein values, total digestible nutrients, the TDN, and other nutritional indicators. Her most recent research applies DNA techniques to analyze fecal samples from cattle and sheep, providing quantifiable data on dietary composition and advancing understanding of livestock prairie interactions. Julie has been awarded multiple awards. The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department's 2024 Lone Star Land Steward Award for the Post Oak Savannah region and ecoregion, and the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society 2024 award. She currently serves also as the vice president of the Northeast Texas Native Prairie Association and the mayor pro tem of Yantis, Texas, and also the volunteer leader of the East Texas, that area of the GLCI in Texas, if I'm not
Yeah, that's right.
mistaken.
Chairman of the Northeast Texas GLC. Yes, Grazing
So
Land
I
Coalition.
probably just butchered a lot of that, but we're just glad
Oh,
to have
that's
you today.
I'm glad to be here and share the information that has been happening over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, and how exciting, Julie. And can you tell us also a little bit more tell us about your livestock, what you're running on your livestock?
Well, type of livestock I'm running right now is Angus Hereford Cross, and I'm only on 70 acres now, but a lot's happening on 70 acres. I run about 8 cows, a bull, and a few steers. I also sell grass finished steers to individuals that are interested in that, as well as introduction of sheep. They're St. Croix and a Dorper Cross, and I run those groups together, which has become very interesting through some of my observations.
Yeah, interesting in a positive way, negative way, like economic way. What are we talking about?
Positive way, positive way. I said the only way that I would ever have sheep is if they could be with my cows. I don't want a dog, and they can be held in with a single wire polywire, and that's what they're doing. Of course, I move them every 2 or 3 days too, so that doesn't make them want to get out and wander onto better pastures. They're always on better pasture
Mm-hmm.
that way. But one interesting, probably getting off topic here right away, but the calves, small calves, like to hang out with the sheep. I think it's because they're about the same size. But I'm learning that not only do calves learn how to eat or what to eat from their mom, but they'll also learn it from their herd mates, and they're also learning it from the sheep. So some of these calves have started eating, say, for instance, even baccharis, which my cows do not eat at this point, or very seldom do they eat that. But also animals learn from other species on what's good to eat.
How interesting. We've heard that in the cattle world about cattle being trained to eat weeds in the pastures. I think some data early on in the grazing world talked about that, but that's really an interesting point that your cattle are going to be especially trained by your sheep.
Yep, they are. They all learn from each other.
How interesting. Well, and tell us about whenever you say you have 70 acres that you're managing, are you dividing those a lot, a little? Are you strip grazing? What's your grazing technique there?
It all depends, and that's the famous answer for just about anything in the cattle world. It depends on what time of year it is, what's growing. Sometimes they're, these 17 or 18 or so cattle are in a 1 acre pasture. Sometimes they're in a 10 acre pasture. It just all depends. This time of year, I'm moving them every day or every other day to eat the rye that's out there. Specifically, a lot of the cool season grasses that are coming up, and taking advantage of that, putting on weight on everything. But again, it depends. If I want to go somewhere and be gone for a few days, I need to give them a bigger pasture. So, and then of course, shade, that depends on too. I'm shade deficient. I have to make sure that during the summer months that they have pastures that they can get back to shade also. So again, it all depends.
Yeah. And I don't want to get too far into your operation, but it's kind of relevant, I feel like, to keep things relevant to producers as well. Let's talk about why we are interviewing someone from East Texas. And Brian, you might could speak to this a little bit too about some similarities across the border here. Why is it even relevant to talk from Louisiana to East Texas?
So, from my opinion, and ecologically, I guess what I mean by that is from an ecological perspective, East Texas and Western Louisiana are extremely similar. Um, so the not only is the overlap, ecological overlap very similar, but the land use tends to be very similar. We both share coastal prairies. We both share flatwoods. We both share xeric or upland longleaf pine savannas, um, and number of other natural community types that cross the Texas-Louisiana border. But also land use tends to overlap on these landscapes as well. So I collaborate with many partners on all our borders, but especially I think especially Texas and Louisiana have the most overlap with land use and ecological overlap as well. So it definitely makes sense um, to incorporate things that have worked well in Texas into Louisiana, particularly Western Louisiana, for sure.
Thanks, Brian. And Julie, what town would you say you're closest to? Was it Yantis?
Sulphur Springs, does that ring a bell to you
Mhm.
guys? Yeah. And I agree with Brian totally. Even when purchasing seed, I go back east instead of going out west. We had some difficult times getting started with natives because the seed that we were sourcing was probably coming from West Texas, and it just did not do very well here. So going back to Roundstone and getting seed from there and purposing it from back east seems to be what works best here in East Texas and probably Western Louisiana as well.
Mhm. Great. Well, Julie, I'm ready, I think, for us to just dig in. Tell us about what you have learned about this grazing system. Sounds so interesting, and I think you'll be able to give us an intro on how you got started with this research.
Well, I thought maybe I ought to give you a little bit of background and how, of course, I got started in all of this. And you went over some of that in the bio, but again, I did buy out an old dairy. And my talk used to be called Dairy to Prairie, but now I've changed it to Who Would Have Thought, and you will understand what that title means as we go on. Again, I was a surveyor, land surveyor for a lot of years. I sure had a lot of fun, by the way. It was for a young woman, and I couldn't have had a better career. And of course, I became totally interested in prairie um, by working in all of those ecosystems out there. I worked with biologists, botanists, archaeologists, paleontologists, and it was working with them that I became totally fascinated with the prairie and all of the all of the ecosystem out there and all of its diversity. Again, I'm in the post oak savanna ecosystem there. You can kind of see there on the map where I'm located with that star. And I guess this probably is the same in Louisiana, but that native tallgrass prairie, used to dominate, at least in Texas, over 24 million acres, but less than 1% of that remains, and that became my focus. And why is it disappearing? Well, for us right here, it's we're turning into suburbia for one thing, but it's also many of the pastures that are out here. Many of them are overgrazed, and most of them are planted in one or two monotypic stand of maybe Bermuda or Bahia. That's the reason why we're losing the tallgrass prairie. Here is an outline of my property, and this is what it looked like. You can see where I'm at home sweet home there, just a little 1.2 acres there. And when I moved there, the dairy was not open. It was closed, and I would never have moved there if I knew that dairy was going to be reopened. And because there was about 150 Holstein cows 30 feet from my back door. So I soon learned to hate cows, and what am I going to do? I can either continue to live there, and I was pretty unhappy every time I came home, or I could buy out the dairy, and it took me 10 years of negotiating, but I bought out that dairy, and all those cows left, and I never wanted to see another cow on my property again. But again, I was for 10 years. I had the Bermuda hay pasture. It was cut and baled for hay, but I wanted to get it back to native, so I contacted Texas Parks and Wildlife, of course, and entered into their Pastures for Upland Birds program, which is a great program for those of us here in Texas. Provides cost share incentives and technical guidance for landowners to restore native grasses and forbs on pastures that are dominated by the exotics. And I started that, entered into a contract in 2015. Glyphosated the place, half of the place. I did this in 2 phases, and did the first planting in 2016 in January. And the second, that was on my first 25 acres, and then the second phase, 40 acres, I planted that in 2017. But things didn't go the way that I thought it should go. I made a lot of mistakes. We did not do a cool season spray, and pretty soon the property became dominated by rye and curly dock. You can see how high it is there, and it grew real tall, over 3 foot tall. Blew over and created a mat, and not too many of the natives were able to come up. So I did the best that I could at the time with my limited knowledge, and I shredded it. Things weren't doing real good, and finally Parks and Wildlife said, you need cows. Of course, that's not what I wanted to hear, but I want a tall grass prairie. And so I decided that I would go ahead and give it a try. And I contacted the NRCS at that time and worked with some of their biologists and some other mentors also, and decided that that's what I was going to do. And I got 40 cows there that very first year, and had them on 1 or 2 acre pastures, and kept moving them all the way through spring. And that's what it looked like when I didn't graze, and that's what it looked like when I started to graze. So I'm really starting to like cows now. Now, Texas Parks and Wildlife, of course, wasn't in favor of me having that many cattle there on the property throughout the entire year. So most of them left, and I kept about 8 and continued to rotate them. And Parks and Wildlife was very happy with the changes that were occurring. And, I can no longer imagine a restoration without the use of cattle, at least in my circumstances. areas that we're doing, okay before, brought in the cattle, we're doing even better. And places where we had never seen some of the grasses before, they started coming in. Now there are many, many areas that I'm still working on to get to where I would like them to be. So we are doing some reseeding. In fact, we'll be doing some next year, of course, too. But the whole thing about this is creating biodiversity. I got the makings of a tallgrass prairie now, but I also have a lot of introduced species, and I'm not so unhappy now about some of those, and we'll talk about that as we go on. But I call them the ladies of the prairie, and of course they were the missing link in my restoration process. And again, I can no longer imagine a restoration without the use of these guys, these gals. Can't bring back the buffalo, but I can graze them in a similar manner. But what are we doing here with Parks and Wildlife and the NRCS? What we're trying to create here is biodiversity. And that helps bring in the other wildlife, but it also is really helping the cattle. And I'll explain that as we go on. Now, what is grazing ecology, creative grazing, whatever you want to call it? But, grazing ecology to me is the focus on the interactions of these large mammal herbivores with the vegetative structure and the plant communities there. And the cows and the sheep are the control disturbance that is helping to shape the ecology and create a diverse habitat for the other wildlife. Remember, I was coming into this on the wildlife side, but what's good for the prairie is also good for the cows, and the cows are good for the prairie, and of course the sheep too. Now, I haven't updated this, but here's just a few of the plants that I observed the cattle eating. And how that got started is, for me, I would open up a pasture and, gosh darn, those cows aren't going to eat grass right away. They're going to eat all of these other things. So talking to the NRCS, and they said, well, Julie, why don't you send it in for forage testing? So that's what I did. So, and I'm still doing that continually. I started that in 21, and I continue that as I'm learning other new species that the cattle and sheep are eating. And I had a huge curly dot problem, but that has become one of the major protein sources for the cows and the sheep. Of course, they eat partridge pea, they're eating arrowleaf sida. They got a smorgasbord out there. Giant ragweed, the same nutritional content as alfalfa. Western ragweed, a lot of people don't think cows eat that, but in the fall they eat the tips off of those. They're kind of oily. Must be getting a lot of fat off of that. Maximilian sunflowers, one of their favorites. They strip almost every leaf off of those. Also, we have these little gourds that grew here. I'm not sure exactly what they are, but it's crack for cows. When they start developing or becoming, they only eat them in the fall. That's when they eat the leaves and the fruit off of those, but they'll all join up in one area and just devour them. All you hear is crunch, crunch, crunch. So we renamed it Cucumis ambrosia adulata, which stands for heavenly cow cucumber. But man, I've got some educated weed eating forbs, or educated forb eating cows, excuse me, out there. And just a few of the things that they're eating: the annual sunflowers, lamb's quarters, prickly lettuce, the curly dock. And diversity is on the menu out here. And how do these cows learn to eat so many diverse forbs? Well, they mostly learn from their mothers, but they will also learn from their herd mates. And it just goes to show, if mama doesn't eat a certain weed, baby won't eat a certain weed. But animals will also choose foods based on palatability. And when mom just isn't providing enough, maybe they'll go out, sample some new foods, as I was explaining earlier, that the calves are starting to eat what the sheep like to eat. Here they are. Gosh, here's this giant ragweed, and I couldn't even get a picture of her. You couldn't even see her. It was so thick. And then one day later, that's what it looked like. This is my giant ragweed demolition team out there. That was a forest out there. You couldn't even see through it.
And Julie, people pay good money for that kind of land clearing.
Hey, say that again. I'm sorry.
People pay good money for that kind of land clearing. I mean, I've seen these sheep and goat crews that will go out to clear land for people. That's pretty amazing right there.
Yeah.
And imagine the amount of herbicide that would cost you to actually do a demolition on that kind of ragweed.
Well, there's a lot of things that these sheep and cows are eating on the property that people pay good money, too much money on herbicide to get rid of. And, that's been kind of my focus on my direction. Let me say, my focus and direction that I've gone to is maybe if we let our pastures become more diverse, and that including some of these forbs or weeds that are out there. I mean, we have healthier cattle, for one thing. I mean, and cows, and I'll show you some statistics. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself about what we're finding here when we get down to the DNA portion of this. But yeah, those sunflowers are just an amazing protein and getting lots of nutrients from them. Of course, all plants have toxins, some more, some less. And, from what I've read and everything, cows learn how to eat. If something is very palatable and very highly nutritious, but it's also somewhat toxic, she'll just eat less of it, or she'll eat it in combination with something else that reduces that toxicity. And one year out here, we had drought. It looks like we might be heading into drought again, and there's just a sea of sunflowers that grew. But those cows ate all of those leaves off of those sunflowers. But another thing those sunflowers provided was shade for some of the other species growing under there. So they, the soil temperature didn't get so high because it was barren or exposed to the sun. But here's something pretty interesting. Of course, I haven't totally updated this yet, but this chart, and I don't like charts, but this chart will tell you a lot right here. Anything above 58% TDN, your cows are putting on fat. The blue is the broadleaf, and the orange is the grasses. The legumes are in the green, and other would be some of your woody species and sedges and rushes and stuff like that. Well, they're putting on fat with the broadleaf that's out there, not with the grass. I mean, some of the grass is good, but not like most of those broadleaf out there. And I just put 4 of plants together here. The blue is always the annual sunflower in this charts, and the orange is the giant ragweed, lamb's quarters, the gray, and the prickly lettuce is kind of the yellow right there. And the red line across there is what a cow needs each day. It's about 58%, or the crude protein about 10 right there. And look how much they're getting from just those few plants right there, and the calcium levels and the phosphorus and the TDN. It's off the charts. Maybe we better be putting a lot more weeds out there. And this one is just for fun. This is for fun. These are the winners. These are from the forage testing now. That line down there is what a 1,200-pound mama cow needs each day. That's about, the TDN and everything down there. But Curly Doc, she's getting 388% of her crude protein from that. Our highest TDN was Bodark leaves, and that's jet fuel for a cow. That's about, it was, I think 80 protein, or 80 TDN on that one. Just unbelievable. And look at the calcium. That was the giant ragweed. She's getting 1,489% of her calcium daily. And one thing, my cows do not eat any minerals at all during the summertime. They don't even touch it. I feel silly just dragging it around to every pasture. They don't need it. They're getting everything that they need from the plants that they're eating.
Julie, can you expand on that a little bit? Is it that you've put it out and they simply didn't touch it, or you just simply...
They don't touch it. They
Wow.
don't touch it at all during the summertime. They'll start it in January and February, sometimes in December. But no, not at all. I don't have to spend much money on minerals. I always have salt out though for them, especially the sheep. They hit the salt quite a bit. But as far as a balanced mineral, the cows don't touch it at all.
Were any
Not
of
necessary.
like which of these that you have noticed right here in these winners was the most surprising to you?
I would say the Bodark.
Mm.
The Bodark leaves, and cows love woody species. I mean, I'm watching them right now. As as everyone knows, in the prairie, the woody species try to take over. But man, they're eating elms, they're eating live oak. There's a lot of nutrients in all of those. But to have an 80 TDN is just unreal. Also, showy evening primrose out there. I mean, and the zinc willows. They don't eat a lot of willows, but you see them eating. They'll pick a few of the leaves off the willows, and they're getting, all the zinc that they need. It's just, I mean, it is that's a vitamin. They're just getting their vitamins out there, everything that they need with biodiversity, of course. Now here's something that I got this little chart here saying that cattle eat 70% grass and 15% broadleaves and 15% shrubs. And as I was watching or looking at this chart a few years ago, I'm thinking, that's not quite right. It might be in certain pastures, but it certainly is not here. We're finding that it's probably closer to they're getting 45% of their protein, of course, from the forbs. But anyway, let me just go on, and I'll explain more of that as we go here. This is what I get from the Gain Lab. I send the manure sample into them each month, and some of that same manure is sent to Jonah Ventures in Boulder, Colorado for DNA testing. But you can see kind of here, and I don't like charts, but this chart's pretty, it tells you quite a bit right here. I mean, the cattle last January only lost a little bit of weight, but come February when the ryegrass started, they're gaining 2 pounds a day. March, 1 pound a day. April, 1.5 pounds, and then of course in May when the cool season grasses start to go down, their weight gain goes down. But come June and July, all these forbs are starting to grow and it's starting to go up. Now, I have not gone through the data from August, September, and October of last year. It's just massive amounts of data to go through, and I will have that updated here hopefully shortly. But I have continued it through another year, so I will have 2 years worth of data when all of this is over. This is also from the Gain Lab, what they're getting, their protein consumption, and their TDN. And this is just all with biodiversity that's out there. And again, this is November through July, November of 24 through July of 25. But here's the fun part now. Here's the DNA testing. And this is what has surprised me to no end about, this is not the quantity that they're eating, this is the percentage of protein in their diet. And plus what the DNA testing provides us is the species that they're eating and where they're getting this protein from. So I knew that the cattle were picking on dewberry, but in November of 24, they were getting 20% of their protein from dewberries, 12% of that from curly dock. We still have crabgrass growing, quite a bit from that. Elm trees, 10%. Arrowleaf sida, that's a native plant that grows here, 9%. 6% was coming from the smartweed. And they were nibbling on Chinese privet. I'm trying to get rid of it, but they were getting some protein from it. Some thistle, and look at down there, Bermuda grass. just 3% oak. And then the other, we'll talk about the other at the end here, what that all is. That's November of 24. Here's December. Again, look at that curly dock. Brazilian vervain. That is an introduced species. It was taking over before the cattle got here, but they have actually knocked it back quite a bit, but they're still getting 21% of their protein from the vervain. And that often grows all through the winter. Now you see 10% cottonseed. I started feeding, I think December 15th, I started feeding a supplement to them. And I was very happy to see that it was able to pick up the cottonseed cubes that they were eating. Again, the Bermuda, that was higher. They're still eating thistle, and then 20% was the other. And I just got my sheep too, so I didn't start collecting data from them or manure from them until February. Look at January. 60% of their protein was coming from curly dock. Now, the smartweed had already been froze back, but they love to eat the dried leaves off of those, so they were still getting their protein from that. Again, the cottonseed, and the bahia was from some of the hay that I was feeding. 27% was other. Okay, here we are in February. Things are starting to grow here. Curly dock was still 44% of their protein. Ryegrass is coming on. I stopped feeding supplement, I think around the 20th of February of 25% other. But look at the sheep protein. And they just devour dewberries. I mean, and they can take over a pasture, but not anymore. Not with the sheep here. March, I couldn't find any sheep little pellets out there because the grass was so tall. So I had to skip the sheep for March. Anyway, again, curly dock, ryegrass, rush, thistle, Carolina geranium, which I never knew they were eating before. So now we're testing that. Here we are in April. We're still eating a lot of curly dock, dewberries, ryegrass, lesser hop trefoil. It looks like a little clover kind of deal. Carolina geranium, buttercups. And of course, the sheep are still devouring those dewberries, and now they're really eating any leaves that they can get off of trees. May, we're still on the curly dock. You know, they don't have to eat a whole lot of it to get their protein from that, but it just kind of blows my mind here what they're eating. I mean, look at May. June, here's the cattle, clover, curly dock, asters, elm, dewberries, grapevines that are out there that I have along my fence between the pasture and where my house is. They ate them all. July's pretty interesting. They were in a pasture with a lot of persimmon trees, native persimmon trees, and they were just devouring that. So that's what came up as their percentage of protein. You don't see a whole lot of grass there. Sheep, of course, we're eating a lot of asters by July, dewberries, goldenrod. Here comes the ragweed. And then, of course, I got to get updated for August of last year and up to now. But here's the others. These are what they're eating, but the percentages were low. But I mean, this is where they're getting, these are the bovine vitamins right here. The goldenrod, chickweed, hackberries, elm, bowdark, vetch, wood sorrel, little barley, crow poison, Chinese pistache tree I have out here, morning glories, privets, all the different sedges. They actually eat some woolly croton, eat the seed pods off of it. The persimmons. It just goes on and on. Henbit. I know people around here are always wanting to kill that henbit that's out there. That little introduced species has that little purple flower that comes up in February and March, and they eat it. So do the sheep. Yeah, it's just absolutely amazing what these cattle can eat and utilize if given the choice of the diversity. I mean, if you were a cow or wildlife, where would you rather live? On a monoculture or on a biodiverse pasture that I'm trying to create? And kind of a summary of what I would, tell people if you're going to attempt a restoration. We're a whole lot better than we were 10 years ago. We know that if there's a lot of cool season species out there and you're trying to establish natives, you're going to have to knock back those cool season ones with some herbicide. Of course, the cows are my missing link in my restoration process, and I always put stress on the gentle cow. I certainly have gentle cows. I'm the only one that does this, and it's great when they're all responsive and very gentle. And cows were once the problem, overgraze, but now they're certainly the solution, and when they're properly managed. And again, they are the control disturbance that helps to shape the ecology. So, I mean, it's not just about cattle; it's about the whole ecosystem that's out there. It's providing habitat for the amphibians, the reptiles, the pollinators, the birds, the cattle, all of them. They all work great all together. Anyway, you got any more questions there, Tara or Brian? That's kind of my spiel there.
Julie, I was wondering and forgive me if I missed this, or could you remind me, what was the time frame between planting and first grazed? How established were those?
3 years.
Okay.
3 years. Yeah. But again, I didn't spray for those cool season grasses, and they began to dominate. And that was kind of the setback of the native restoration. Again, some areas are okay, others we're redoing. But now when I do an area, I make sure that I do a cool season spray to knock back those cool seasons, to get our warm season grasses growing and forbs.
So you would recommend at least 2 spraying events per year, one spring and then another one summer, fall? Is that?
Yeah, probably around. I mean, people suggest different things. I know Parks and Wildlife here likes to do one in June when that, maybe your Bahia or Bermuda is really growing good. And that's a good time to do your first spray. You might have to do some spot sprays, a month later, depending on the rain, of course, that you're getting. And then, of course, cool season spray maybe in January, February when it's coming up. Now, I did do most of my plantings in January, but my best plantings, and of course that all depends on weather, was always in March after getting rid of the cool season stuff. I did planting, I think on March 15th is one of my better small areas that I've restored. And then I do keep the cattle out of there for at least 2 years. Now, if things are growing really good after a year, and I'll let the cattle go through there maybe for a few hours and just move on. I don't let them stay in there very long until it's about 2.5, 3 years old.
How interesting.
So if you're having some sort of restoration, you would recommend at least a portion or the restored portion to be rested for at least about 3 years.
Yeah, after you initially plant, yes.
Okay.
2 to 3 years. I mean, maybe after 2 years, if you get the right amount of rains and everything happens at the right time.
Okay.
There's that famous "it depends."
Julie, when you mentioned that you had a lot of cows at first to get rid of all that rye, and then a lot of them left. Can you tell us more? Were they stockers or cow calf?
They were all cow calf. Pretty much, and I borrowed most of those. I ended up, of course, remember I didn't want any cows. I hated cows. I got some cows from neighbors and also from one of my mentors, and I ended up buying 13 cows from him. And yeah, the love affair began with cows. It's just an amazing animal to watch. I just get a lot of pleasure from going out and watch what they're eating. They when they're eating it makes it sound. They sound like I wish I could eat grass.
what inspired you to begin, I guess, picking up poop and actually analyzing it?
Well, I owe that to my grazing specialist from the NRCS. I mean, that's where I learned most everything. I have a great grazing specialist. His name is Brandon Bing, from Palestine, Texas, and he's on my speed dial. Anyway, I ask him a lot of questions. He helps me a lot, but he's the one who suggested that. He always puts it, wouldn't it be fun to learn what crude protein that they're all getting? So when he asks a question like that, or wouldn't it be fun, I know that means I need to listen, and maybe I need to start analyzing. And he's the one who found out about the Jonah Ventures, about the DNA for me, and I just ran with it. The GLC has helped too. Jenny Pluhar from the GLC has helped me enormously, and she helps on some of the workshops that we host here also. Which also, I'll put in a plug for that right now. We're going to do principles before practices at a workshop here on May 12th, 2026 from about 10 to 3. And then again, of course, that'll be here, and the GLC will be sponsoring that. And then a big event, my big event that I've had here since 2018, skip a couple of years there for COVID. And that's our Prairie Day. That's the last Saturday of every September. And we bring in many different agencies and local producers. We'll bring in the NRCS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Texas Parks and Wildlife, the Audubon Society, Native Prairie Association of Texas, Native Plant Society, all these different agencies. We also have the Blackland Raptor Center come. Texas Master Naturalist hosts the kids area, and we do a pasture walk every hour, and we'll have a different agency. Maybe Audubon will lead one, and people that are interested in birds can go with that one, NRCS, and maybe a producer will lead a walk and talk about cattle and the forages that are out there for them. You know, it's just a real fun day, and it introduces people to different ideas that they may not be exposed to. And if one agency can't help you because you don't have enough acreage, or for another reason, maybe a different agency can. So yeah, we have a lot of fun out here. And that old dairy, you can see that on the slide there. That was the old milk shed where all the cows were milked, but that's what we turned into our learning center over there.
Yeah, that sounds like a great road trip.
It's a lot of fun
to go on over there. And Julie, where do you see this in 5 to 10 years? Where do you see your prairie then?
Oh, where do I see it? I'm probably only 25 to 30% native. I don't want to be 100% native. I mean, I like having a little bit of Bermuda. I like having some of these non-native plants out there. I think they have a place in, I think they have a place here. I mean, most of them are naturalized now anyway. I probably like to be about 60 to 70% native, and then the rest, you know, Bermuda and some of the other species there. Anyway, that's kind of where I'd like to be. Who knows, by then I may change my focus again. That's where I'm at today.
And what about if other producers were really interested in this and wanted to get more quantification data, or do you see this project expanding to include several more people participating?
That's a good thought. I hadn't really thought about that. But if anybody's interested in the data, I can certainly provide anybody with the forage testing that we've done. I mostly do that with Ward Laboratories. And you can see, of course, you know, it's going to be different on every piece of property. Again, hey, the dairy has provided me with some highly rich land. I mean, there'd been a dairy here for 50 years on and off. And what other people may get around me may not be the same thing as far as, nitrogen and all of that in the soil. But anyway, yes, I can provide some of the DNA testing that we're doing, and of course the gain lab also. And yes, I would. There are other people that I'm working with that are also interested in that. American Farmland Trust, the Texas Grazing Network, they're also interested in many of the things that we're doing out here too.
I'd say so. And it would just be really interesting to see maybe in some other areas, and over here in Southeast Louisiana, a little bit different species, but it would be so interesting to see what's going on with some of the species, like the privet hedges and the yaupons and things like that, that we think that the cattle are nibbling on, but we're not sure that even the little tips of that poisonous plant, mint, we have quite a bit of that. Things that are labeled as invasive or otherwise. It's been really interesting to hear this talk and and just kind of have a mind shift here about looking at plants in a little bit different manner. I did have a question about that too, Julie. Like how do you maneuver the human and aesthetic element? Like, what do your neighbors think?
Oh, they used to think I was nuts. I'll tell you a quick story. When I first started this, it looked pretty bad, pretty weedy, a lot of mare's tails. It was bad. And I live in the town of Yantis. Granted, it's only 400 people, but anyway, somebody wrote to the city council of Yantis saying, can't we make her shred it? It looks really bad. We're thinking the weeds are all going to come in on our properties. And so Texas Parks and Wildlife actually wrote the city council a letter explaining to what what we were doing and what we were achieving. And yes, it's not always going to look like this. It looks different every year, and it's going to look better. And so I didn't hear any more about that, but I decided to start sitting at the city council meetings and to see if anybody would ask me any questions, and nobody ever did. And after about a year, I said, well, if there's ever any opening on the city council, I would like to get on the city council. And about 3 months later, somebody that moved out of the city could no longer be on the council. So they asked me if I wanted to join. I said, absolutely. And of course, now I'm mayor pro tem. But the city has totally bought into what we're doing out here. They're a huge sponsor of our Prairie Day. And yeah, it has changed the community. Not everybody, and we have a lot of dairy farmers out here. It's, not everybody's going to change, but it only takes a few sparks of people to see what the difference can be by creating diversity. Because cows just aren't only choosing grass to eat. That's been the myth. When I first started learning about cows, I thought all they ate was grass. And I don't think I told you these exact numbers, but this is the November through July data. This is the percentage of protein in their diet. 45% of their protein is coming from forbs. And 5% of that is coming from legumes, and only 15% of their protein is coming from grass. And 3% of that came from the supplements that they were eating, and 2 or 3% came from the rushes and the sedges, and then there's all the other stuff that was in there. But cows are not, at least on a biodiverse, they have a choice. They could eat all the grass that they wanted. They are choosing to get their protein from the forbs. And I think, cattle know what's good for them, for themselves. If they have a choice, they're going to go for the best.
Julie, I was curious, and your thoughts on this. As your landscape, I believe you said 20 to 30% native now, and you hope to get 60 to 70. Which species that are in that other list do you expect to increase across the landscape, especially for their protein content?
For the grasses or for the forbs?
Or either or. Yeah, you had a number of species in the other list that might be, I might be making an assumption here, but in low quantities, so they're not making up that much of the protein content. Or it could be the cattle are just not selecting it now, but over time, as your native percent cover increases, which species do you expect to move up higher in that protein percent content of the fecal or the manure?
Well, let's start with the grasses. I do pretty well with Eastern Gamma out here. I have some spots that are dominated by the Eastern Gamma, and I would like to increase that in some of my other areas, as well as some more big blue stem. We did an initial planting of little blue stem, and actually none of it came up. But now we're finding that the little blue stem that we source from back east, coastal little blue stem, does very well here. So I have some of that. We'll be planting some of that. A little bit more switchgrass does okay out here. Probably need to increase in some areas. Cattle do real well on that. But the forbs, I'm going to stick with the curly dock. Of course, that's not going to go away. And also, by the way, they say that's toxic, but as you can see, it doesn't seem to be hurting these cows at all. But some of the natives, I would like a little more Illinois bundleflower, probably some partridge pea in some areas. That's a great legume for them. You know, and I would like to increase some of the Maximilian sunflowers for one. Another one that's really very good out here. Trying to think of some other ones. I don't have in mind. I'm having a blockage here about some of the stuff. I don't want to get rid of my Brazilian vervain because that's so high in protein and good for the cows also. So yeah, you know, I don't have a real good answer for you of some of the other forbs that I want to increase with that. Maybe I only want to get to 50% native on that, because it sure seems to, the cows there seem to do well on the entire product that's out there. Naturalized, non-natives, and natives. I hope I kind of answered your question there.
Yes, you did. That's what I was I was curious as to what you would think would be increasing across your property over the coming years.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Julie, what is your why? What would you say is your biggest why in doing this?
My biggest why? That cows just don't eat grass. And I see pasture after pasture with a monotypic stand of grass. And I'm sure the cows are doing just fine, but they could sure be doing a whole lot better with a diverse, biodiverse ecosystem that's out there. If you provide that, my cows are fat. They routinely are about body condition 7.
Wow.
They don't lose weight. They don't lose much weight during the winter. And my grazing specialist says, Julie, you don't need to supplement your cows in the winter, but I can't help myself. But yeah, the why is they don't just eat grass, and that what I kind of was led to believe or understood when I first started, and that's what I observe. That's what I observed driving around. Cows eat grass. But that's just not the case.
Right. What would you say are some of your, as we're kind of closing out, Brian, did you have any more thoughts, questions?
Oh, I could sit here and talk to Julie all day. I'm not going to tie up that time, but hopefully I can follow up maybe with some more questions. Nothing for now, though. But thank you.
Great. And Julie,
Thank you, Brian.
Any, favorite books or resources that you can recommend for people who want to study more about this or learn more?
I think the best one to learn about natives is Patrick Kaiser's Native Grasses. I can't remember which university he's out of. Tennessee? I'm not sure about that. Patrick Kaiser. So that is the best book. Of course, I don't have a mind right now. Let's see some of my favorite books. I should have brought them out here. I can't think of the names or the titles right now. There's one that's called Weeds, and it talks about, it was written in 1920s, and I can send you that information. But this particular individual noticed how important that the forbs, or the so-called weeds, were to cattle, and that people actually used to, and I don't know how they did it or how they dried it, but would harvest the giant ragweed for cattle,
Wow.
for one thing. I mean, somehow, I guess it was, I don't know, that our government told us that we were better on non-native species. um, I don't know how we got off of the native track.
Right. And it may have been a society as well as government or.
Well, sure, sure. And we have a lot of set stock now, and you're not going to have natives and really anything left if you just have set stock in one place. They're going to eat your natives to death. And that's actually what happened here. We ate them to death.
And how many days of grazing is too many? Of course, there's a lot of it depends, but what would you say is kind of your max on during the active growing season?
Through the spring, I'll come back in 30 days. I mean, I'm moving them pretty quick, but things are growing, of course, depending on the rain, of course, also. But then as summer moves on, depending on what's growing and what in pasture, I have some areas that are more wet where the ragweed grows. They might be down there a little bit longer, but typically 60 days before I'll bring them around again. And then I do stockpile one of my pastures or different pastures, and I like to, depending again on the rain, remove the cattle from there and not let them in after August 1st, August 15th, and then they won't go back in there until maybe December, depending on the weather, and that's their stockpile. So I don't have to feed hay. Now, I didn't have to feed hay the first 3 years that I had cattle. I had just the right amount of rain here, but we've kind of been in some droughty conditions, at least where I'm at here, kind of localized drought. And I did have to feed some hay the last 3 years. This year I did try something different. I have what I call a sacrifice area, and I threw the cows back there. I think we had a pretty good cold snap around the end of January, towards the end of January, and I started feeding them hay and cubes back there until about February 1st. About 30 days is actually what I had them back there. That's the first time I've ever done that and not moved them. But the reason being is that the rye started coming up in November, December here, and I was able to move the cattle every few days throughout the winter just to eat rye. I mean, it was coming up and they were utilizing it until we had that real cold snap. And then, of course, I tried something again different this year. Now, I'm hoping next year or this year I won't have to feed hay again. We'll just see. But the rain is not coming like it should, so who knows what'll happen.
Yeah, and that's a great testament to that "it depends" statement, that you just have to be flexible. To me, what's really cool about your story, one thing that really stood out to me is all the blackberries and the dewberries. I was really impressed with that
Yeah.
concept of the cattle eating those. I've seen so many fence lines and things like that that people are just really wanting to spray on that, but it seems like that might be a great resource that we're missing out on.
Yeah, no, the cattle aren't going to eat a whole lot of dewberries. They get a lot of protein out of just a little bit of dewberries. But if you need sheep and goats, if you don't want dewberries, they devour it.
And I thought one more ticket to success that really stood out to me was that you didn't like cows, therefore you didn't get cows at first. And I think that's where there becomes a struggle as existing cattle farmers trying to get started with this and then needing a place for their cattle to go while that is being established. That's a huge challenge. Do you have any tips there or tricks that you can suggest?
Well, depending on how much acreage that you have, you certainly don't need to do it all at once. I would just do a few acres a year in that. Would be my suggestion, and what a lot of people are starting to do around here when introducing natives or creating more biodiversity that way. Just do a little bit at a time. If you have to keep them out 2 years and you're doing a little bit each year, you always have something coming on that you can move the cattle to. Or, of course, if you're lucky, if you can lease land. That's getting pretty hard around here right now. People can get so much money just by selling their land now that seems to be the way it's going.
Yeah, that'll be the next podcast subject.
Yeah, yeah.
Julie,
Yeah.
one quick question. Have you ever employed prescribed fire or a fire treatment on your property? And if so,
Yes.
how often or when?
Well, I would like to do 1/3 or 1/4 a year. I have so much rye. We're actually going to try a summer burn this year with Texas Parks and Wildlife in one area, which we've never done before. I do a lot of, I just go out with my drip torch. If I can't get a good fire going and just do some isolated burns, I can do that by myself if conditions are right. I do that every year except for this year. I have not done any burns at all, just because of that cold snap that we had, kind of at the wrong time of year. But yeah, it kind of set back everything. You know what's weird about this year? I don't know about for you guys over there in Louisiana, but this is the first time that I'm having to graze cool season and my warm season simultaneously are coming up. Usually I can get through March and just a little bit into April when all the warm seasons are growing, but we've had such warm weather in March that they're all at the same time. So this is a new, just another thing, another thing the weather is throwing us. Like I say, it's different every year. So that's going to be interesting. But the cows are, of course, choosing the cool season stuff right now. That's what their preference is. But yes, when it gets back to prescribed burning, I would like to do more. I think Parks and Wildlife and I are kind of doing a burn plan to do some patchwork grazing. We'll do just a few acres one year and then another area and see how the cattle do on that, doing that way. But it is so important to put fire to everything. Things do so much better. That's another reason why now I'm on the board of directors of the volunteer fire department. If we have a fire, they can help. They are waiting for us to do a big burn here so that they can come out and do some training.
Sounds like it's become a big part of your community as well.
It has. Yeah.
Well, what a neat thing you're doing, Julie. We commend you for your work in this. And it sounds like despite the city council and despite your dislike for cows, that this has come such a long way.
It's been a lot of fun and it's a learning experience. I mean, like I said, I'm not an expert on anything. Mostly what I've learned is through observation and asking a lot of questions, and it sure is a lot of fun. Sure is a lot of fun watching cattle graze and sheep graze and seeing what they eat, and then the big question is why? Why do they eat it? And of course, I think we're learning why. We're learning the why now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, this has been enlightening. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing this information with us. I knew we would gain a lot from that, and I hope that this will help some other people take and run with it and be able to get some other things going.
I hope so. And if anybody has any questions, of course, out there, you can give them my email or my phone number.
Thank you, Julie.
Well, thank you very much. I sure enjoyed it.